In the middle of a brutal war, soldiers marched into battle not knowing if they would see another dawn. Among them was a young man named Daniel, a quiet figure with steady eyes and unshakable loyalty to his homeland. He had left behind his parents, his fiancée, and a small village that depended on him. For those who knew him, Daniel represented hope and the promise that life would one day return to normal. But one day, amidst chaos at the front lines, Daniel disappeared. His unit was ambushed, and in the smoke, gunfire, and confusion, no one ever saw him again. His name was etched into the lists of the missing. His family received no body, no letter, not even confirmation of his death. Just silence. In his village, time moved forward, though the absence of Daniel was felt in every gathering and every meal. His fiancée, after years of waiting, eventually married another, believing Daniel was gone forever. His parents aged with sorrow etched into their faces, always leaving a chair empty for the son they never buried. As decades passed, the war ended, the world changed, and generations grew up without knowing his story. For them, Daniel was just a name in an old book, one among many soldiers who vanished in the fog of war. But for those who remembered him, he was the man who had walked into the unknown and never returned. And yet, fate had not finished with Daniel. Far away, in a land foreign to his own, he was alive, lost, captured, and unable to return. His days stretched into years. Survival became his only companion. He was forced into labor camps, then into obscurity. He watched seasons pass, strangers die beside him, and the world shift without him. But deep within, he carried the memory of home like a flame that never went out. Half a century later, that flame guided him back to the borders of the world he once knew. His hair had turned white, his hands were calloused, and his face carried the scars of both war and time. Daniel, the soldier thought lost forever, was finally coming home. But home had changed, and he would soon learn that sometimes the return is not as simple as stepping back into the life you left behind. When Daniel finally stepped onto familiar soil, the world he saw was not the one he had left. The village that once echoed with children's laughter was now paved with streets and new buildings. Strangers occupied houses he once knew intimately. The fields where he had played as a boy had been replaced with shops and noise. He walked through the town square with a limp, wearing worn-out clothes that made him look more like a beggar than a soldier returning from war. People stared, curious, but no one recognized him. The faces were different, the voices unfamiliar. Daniel realized he was not returning to the world he had lost. He was entering a new one that had no memory of him. His heart ached as he sought out his family's home. The house still stood, but its doors and windows had been repainted, its garden grown wild. A stranger answered the door. For Daniel, it felt like the final confirmation. His place here had been erased by time. His parents were gone. Their graves were in the cemetery nearby, marked by stones carved with the years of waiting they had endured. They had died, never knowing their son had survived. In the town church, Daniel found the records of his fiancée. She had remarried decades earlier, raised children, and lived a full life without him. The thought was bittersweet. She had chosen life instead of endless waiting, and he could not blame her. But it left Daniel with the sharp realization that his return had no place to land. The soldier who had once belonged here now walked as a ghost among the living. People looked at him with pity, curiosity, and disbelief, but few wanted to hear the full story. The war was long over, the wounds had healed, and the world had moved on. Only Daniel remained stuck in the shadow of a battle that time itself had buried. And yet, word spread. Some elders began to remember his name. Fragments of his story whispered across town. A few who had been children when he disappeared approached him cautiously, marveling at the sight of a man thought dead for 50 years. For them, Daniel was living history, a reminder of the sacrifices forgotten by time. But admiration could not replace belonging. Daniel found himself sleeping in shelters, eating at charity kitchens, and wandering through streets that had no space for him. He had returned, but return did not mean home. Still, Daniel carried himself with quiet dignity. He did not demand pity. Instead, he told his story to anyone who would listen, not as a plea for sympathy, but as a testament to endurance. Yet one question haunted him with every passing day. If the world had moved on without him, then what was the purpose of his survival? Daniel's presence in the village soon became more than just an oddity. His story, once whispered in corners, began to spread beyond the town. Reporters arrived, intrigued by the tale of a soldier who had vanished for half a century and returned as if time itself had released him. Cameras captured his weathered face, and his words echoed through newspapers and broadcasts. Suddenly, the man who had been invisible became a symbol, not just of survival, but of memory. People began to realize that behind every name etched on a wall or listed in a book was a life with dreams, loves, and sacrifices. Daniel embodied the cost of forgetting, and in his quiet way, he demanded remembrance. Schools invited him to speak to children. Veterans sought him out, shaking his hand with tears in their eyes. For those who had also carried scars of war, Daniel's story gave voice to the years of silence they had endured. The town that once treated him as a stranger now began to claim him as a living monument. Yet, Daniel never sought glory. He spent his days tending to his parents' graves, repairing the old paths of the cemetery, and sitting by the plaque the town eventually placed in his honor. It read simply, "The soldier who returned, carrying the weight of time." In his final years, Daniel found peace not in reclaiming the life he had lost, but in ensuring others would never be forgotten as he had been. He became a bridge between the past and the present, reminding the world that history is not just written in books, it lives in the people who carry its scars. When he eventually passed away, the town mourned him as one of their own. Bells rang, crowds gathered, and his story was told once more, not as a tragedy, but as a lesson, that time can erase names, but courage and endurance can outlive even the longest absence. Daniel, the soldier who vanished into the fog of war and returned 50 years later, left behind no riches, no descendants, no grand titles. But he left a legacy of remembrance, ensuring that no one would again be dismissed as a name lost to history. And so, the soldier finally came home, not to the house he once knew, but to the hearts of those who promised never to forget.